Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 277, recorded at Big Dog Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is brought to you by Ace High Graphics. We print custom t-shirts, hats, hoodies, bags, and more using a low-impact, heat-infused printing process you can trust. Get a quote today at acehighgraphics.com. TheRealHerbMarket.com. Wouldn't it be nice if there was an online store that sold herbals from verified herbalists making crafted herbal products? Now there is. TheRealHerbMarket.com. Now, here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio.
Hey, gotcha. So anyway, it's always, we say this every time. It's so hard to start these things. We know what we're going to talk about. We know how we're just going to go, but it's just starting. It always seems to be this, I don't know how to start it.
Well, I loved the fact that Oshala Farm and Elise and Jeff have they're like the county that they're in is GMO seed free. I think it's hard to wrap my mind around that ability for their county to have been able to do that.
Yes.
And the fact that the people actually have the right to make their own choices. Because, I mean, there's been so many things about GMO seeds spreading through the pollen into everybody else's crops and pretty much polluting everybody.
And for those that don't know what GMO means, it's genetically modified organism, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah.
See, I didn't know. I had to make sure. And GMO seeds have been genetically modified typically, and the most common one is to be resistant to pesticides, certain pesticides.
Certain pests.
And pesticides though too, like Roundup.
Oh, yeah.
If you have Roundup.
Herbicides. So they're resistant to stuff that kills plants.
Exactly. So that's the idea behind them, and and in concept, it's really cool. These plants, and they can grow and grow and grow, and nothing will hurt them, so that they could solve the problem. Well, that's not the way this has worked out. In fact, what they're talking about now is that it was a short-sighted technology that is really actually causing way more problems than it's actually fixing.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of wonder if part of the desertification, if that's the right word, or the aridification of California and the Southwest in general, where they've used tons of this technology, is in part because of this technology.
Well, that I'm not sure on. I mean, you can just look at rainfall for that one, well,
it's not just rainfall though. It's also the plants not being able to hold nutrients in the soil, which then causes the nutrients or the soil to become more.
That's true. The four main crops that are really heavily GMO'd are corn, wheat, soybean, and one other one. Gosh darn it. But it's one of the major ones that we grow here in the U.S. And export. And even funny is, like, a lot of countries don't even want to have the GMO seeds coming into their or stuff coming into their countries too. So we're stuck with a product that nobody really wants, but us.
And we keep getting stuck with it, because even if we don't want it, how do you get rid of it when it's rampant and everywhere? Oh, absolutely.
And and they cross-pollinate with other seeds that are not, and there's all this stuff that happens. And so what's also happening, which is interesting, is that because these GMOs have been designed to be resistant to all these things, those things have started to fight back, mostly the insects.
Oh, yeah.
The insects are like, we got this.
We will adapt.
And they did. And now they're seeing more and more damage coming from insects. So what is the solution? Let's pour more and more crap on it.
Let's do more damage to the soil and the environment.
Right. So now there's more. So with herbicide tolerant GMO, like soybeans, are facing like a massive weed resistance problems, because the weeds around them have become resistant to those.
To all those killers.
As Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Yeah, nature finds a way.
Yeah, it just figures it out.
Yeah.
And so you've got them having to put this other stuff on there, which is even worse than the other things. And then it's so bad that there's a thing called drift that happens with this herbicide, and gets into other people's farms and stuff.
Yes.
In fact, there was a very large lawsuit over this. There's a farmer in Missouri did this, and he lost 30,000 trees to this this thing. And
heartbreaking.
He was, and he sued. Yeah. He sued Bayer, which was Monsanto, but he sued Bayer now for $265 million, and he won.
See, the thing that astounds me is that, like, for instance, like, Elise said, our county didn't act fast enough. It didn't act with her county and Josephine County. And therefore, our county, which houses a decent sized, university, and Lynn County, which is just north of us and houses a huge agricultural program, are not GMO-free counties. Well, does that mean that you can even trust any of the information coming out of those schools? Because how do you know that they don't have drift or they don't have other GMO pollens polluting their crops?
That's entirely possible. I mean,
that's, to me, it's astounding that or the state of Oregon would say, oh yeah, we're not going to allow other counties to go GMO free, which means that we were seriously compromising, as far as I can tell, the science that we rely so heavily on, because that's a huge piece of our industry here in this area of Oregon.
Well, yeah. Even in Eastern Oregon, I mean, you have wheat growing. The thing is that the other thing that happens with all of this stuff is, aside from the issue with the plants themselves, let's talk the soil health.
Yeah. Or
lack of soil.
That's health. What I'm talking about with the desertification, and that I'm betting this had a strong impact on what's happened down in California, that area.
You're right, man. We saw that documentary. It was at The Big Little Farm, I think it was called.
Yeah, The Little Big Farm.
Little Big Farm. It was in Southern California. It was in Hulu, and this couple got it, and it took them 5 years of struggle to change it over to something, and whereas all their neighbors hadn't changed any of their practices, they set up a water catchment with a big pond. They changed all the soils. They had they added all these things to the natural stuff back in, the grazing of animals, the fertilizers, all these things. And yes, they went through some growing pains for those 5 years, and they'll even tell you that in the documentary. But by the end of it, now when they pull up dirt and soil, it's actually soil. Yeah. And they have better water retention. Their trees and everything can handle have been handling the drought better, as of when this was filmed.
And the winds and storms that had blown through didn't rip away their topsoil as it did their neighbors.
Exactly. So you can look at that and say, it'll take time, but honestly, 5 years.
That's not
to
very
turn
long.
Over,
to reverse decades of damage and
yeah.
abuse. I mean,
so if you haven't ever seen that documentary, what was it called again, Candace?
I think it was The Little Big Farm. We'll put it in the show notes.
It's currently streaming on Hulu, if that's one of the ones that you get. And the article that I was looking at with Candace was it's from the Organic and Non-GMO Report website, and it's called The Coming Obsolescence of GMO Seeds by Ken Rosborough. And it was published this year in February. And I'm frankly kind of happy to see this. I mean, we have been going down the wrong road so much on our monoculture, on our one-way track of planting and our one way of doing it. I'm not a farmer. I'm not in that industry. I know there's challenges. I understand that. Yeah. But it just seemed like to be, if you want to talk about, that farmer's common sense, that they're supposed to have the best common sense. It doesn't seem common sense for someone to buy a seed that then requires you to use their herbicide so that you can't. It's like this whole system is like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, creating that kind of locked-in system is generally non-common sense, especially when you start looking at making your living from the natural world. Because the natural world throws you curveballs all the time. Right. It changes the dynamics all the time. That's normal. That's the rule of nature, is change. So why would you want to be locked into a rigid system that you cannot escape? That's a prison.
And many of the farmers, that is what ends up happening. And at the end of the day, they don't, farming, they're losing farmers at a record pace in general.
Yeah. I kind of think what happened was that 50 years ago, farmers thought this will make it easier. That farming will somehow become easier. I won't have to think as much, figure it out as much, because that's challenging. I mean, we all face that level of thinking that we kind of wish we would not have to think as much in any career, all careers. It's always like that. And I kind of think these rigid systems were a lure, and ultimately it's like a fishing lure, lures you to your death. It's not taking you where you want to go. You do need to stay creative and stay vital. And the problem with the exhaustion that I think probably led to people thinking this was going to be a great choice is that we need to change our overall values. Everybody needs to. I mean, we can't keep running at a really hard pace. You can't run full steam ahead all the time. You're going to run out of steam really fast.
Yeah.
And I think the GMO structures or systems that they came up with and all of those were a false promise. You know? Yeah. Temporary, very short-term gain, semi-gain, hopeful gain, hope of short-term gain for long-term death.
If you've ever felt like the black sheep or oddball in the crowd because you absolutely love the plants, the Herbal Nerd Society wants you. We've got a place ready, set for you among our community of plant geeks and herbalists at the Herbal Nerd Society. But be aware that we'll keep you busy learning about the plants on all levels: phytochemistry, energetics, formulation, essential oils, and how to put it to use in real life. If that's your jam, join us at herbalnerdsociety.com.
So anyway, yeah, I think it's a good thing to see it's happening, and I'm happy to see many farmers are starting to decide to go back to the things that made their land good and made what they did better.
Yeah, and connected them, I think, more deeply with the land, which I think usually ends up with better everything. Happier lives for the farmers, happier lives for the plants. Mm-hmm. You know, a system that's just much happier and more productive and healthful. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, you know, as far as planting seeds, this year was a bust for me for planting. I mean,
yeah, we've talked about it. It's
ridiculous how bad my seeds did not grow. Like 2 of the 30 of the seeds that I planted actually sprouted.
And these are ones that you had saved, that you had harvested. These were not commercially bought seeds, right?
Well, actually, I do have a squash plant that for up until the first week in August was literally 12 inches total across. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was super short. That was the plant that you said was so big, and I laughed at you. I'm like, yeah, no, it's only like 12 inches. It's a really small plant. Then we had that heat wave, and it exploded. I mean, it was putting on like 6 inches overnight. It became the size it should be. And it's got, you know, squash starting to flowering and squashes beginning to form. Mm. That one is a seed that I purchased. It's a Tokyo blue squash. I've never grown it before, but I thought, oh, I'll give this a try. If I like it, I'll save some seeds.
Right.
And then there's another one that's a volunteer, and I'm not actually sure yet what it is. I saved a few melon seeds, and I saved some squash seeds last year. And then the rest of the melon and the squash got buried in the garden in that spot. So it's either a watermelon or a squash. My bet is on the squash, and it's volunteered. So it was like sort of saved. You know,
right.
The other squash seeds that I saved, I was going to plant them, and then I just never did. And then a friend of mine gave me some tomato plants from seeds that he had started. So I planted those in the spot where the squash was going to go, and that's fine. He planted more squash than he can use, so he said he'd give me plenty. So I decided that'd be good. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this year I've been saving seeds as we go. I mean, I had some Tulsi that I saved the seeds from. I have some motherwort. I saved some motherwort seeds and some parsley seeds. And all of those I'll plant those. Hopefully next year they'll actually grow. I honestly don't know why seeds didn't grow for me this year. They didn't grow in the garden. They also didn't grow in the, I did the starting early, the seed trays and stuff. I tried that too, and I didn't get anything to grow. It was kind of freakish.
I just had a theory that you just debunked because of what you just said. So
yeah, it wasn't from. We tried the dig in composting in one bed this year. Mm-hmm. That's the bed that has the squash plant that's actually growing, and then the eggplants that my friend also gave us those, and those are growing slowly. But
yeah, they're really slow. No, I was thinking more along the line. Maybe this is still when we cleaned the duck ponds this year, we had a lot of the the bottom waste that we we put a lot of that in there because it's not heavily organic compounds, but we gave a lot to our neighbor, and her garden's growing.
Her garden was growing great.
Very good. So maybe it's not that.
No, I think there's something about my energy in seed planting this year or something like that.
You just weren't with the seed, Candace.
I wasn't. But somehow I was one with the perennials. We bought the tea plants, and they're doing great. And then we bought lavender I put in, and the honeyberry bush that we actually just moved from one spot to another, but where it'll be much happier. Mm-hmm. I added some Ursa Irvi and some rosemary, peonies, several more, I can't remember, some sedge. I mean, the plants that I planted, the jasmine, all of those have done really well, surprisingly well, because my friend, even, despite that, there was a heat wave that we had in, I think it was July.
End of June.
That heat wave ended up causing a lot of problems for my friend who did really well with the seeds. His perennials really suffered, whereas mine did not. And we are close to each other. I mean, right. So we had pretty much the same weather.
Yeah.
And he is, in all honesty, a better gardener than I am. I mean, he's very good, and I'm not as good. Let's just say. But our perennials have done really well. So for some reason, this year was apparently not my year for annual and seed type of starting. It was more for planting perennials. It happens.
Mm-hmm. It does.
The seeds that I did save and that I will be saving over the rest of this season, I'm going to use next year, and I'm sure it'll be fine. They'll grow. I've never had a year like this before, ever, where seeds that I planted, where nothing I planted grows. That's just like weird. So weird.
There is an Herbal 101, and it is from Ariel. And Ariel asks, can mugwort be substituted with nutmeg in formulas such as the 4 Thieves vinegar? Well, Candace,
that is a really good question. The 4 Thieves vinegar that we have is a recipe that Sue wrote for us years ago. It's really effective. It's a really good, solid recipe. And it is based on, she did a lot of research. It's based on what the original 4 Thieves most likely would have used.
Sure.
There's a load of variations on that formula used in various forms, including essential oils forms and stuff like that. And some of them do use nutmeg. I would suggest that if you need to remove the mugwort because you don't have it or whatever, wormwood would be my next favorite choice. But if you don't have access to that, I would consider nutmeg as well. Nutmeg definitely would work, but I would definitely caution you that if you're using nutmeg or wormwood, but really if you're using nutmeg, keep it as an external formula because nutmeg has psychedelic properties to it that can become scary and dangerous if you take too much of it. So generally, the 4 Thieves vinegar is meant to be a very strong vinegar. So you're going to be using a higher dose of nutmeg. So you need to be, if you're going to use it internally, be careful. Mm-hmm. Be careful about your dosing.
So based on our question, I could be wrong, but the way it seemed like it was worded, I think she was looking for an overall, can mugwort be substituted in general by nutmeg? And you use 4 Thieves as an example, but other recipes that would call for
not necessarily
for mugwort. So it's not a 1-to-1.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. No, in 4 Thieves vinegar specifically is what I'm talking about. You could use yarrow as a substitute instead of mugwort as well if you want to do it for internal. But in any other formula, you'll have to take a look at the formula and determine what is it that the mugwort is doing in the formula and what is the intent of the formula before you can make a decision about nutmeg or any other substitutes.
Well, great. So I hope that answers your question, Ariel. Yeah. And till next time, put an herb on it. The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA. They're not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease.
All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.